Career in Tech. My name is Angelin, and I am the Engagement Manager for the Beam Path. And today I'm joined by several panelists who are tech industry insiders. What we want to highlight in this panel is the fact that there are many different roles in tech. You can work at a tech company in a non-technical role. You can work at a company that's not known as a tech company and have a technical role, or you can work at a tech company in a technical role. So there are many different paths for you to attain a career in this industry if you're interested. We'll start by first discussing our panelists' experience in the tech industry. And then in the second half, we'll talk about how candidates can prepare for and find positions in technology. So I'll start with my own background, and then I'll call on the panelists here to introduce themselves before we get started. So again, my name is Angelin. I attended Murrah High School in Jackson, Mississippi. Then I went to the University of Pennsylvania, and I was a BOLD intern at Google. So BOLD is for Building Opportunities for Leadership and Diversity. And it was a program specifically targeted at increasing representation of diverse students in technology. I interned there for 2 years, and then I worked there full-time for 3 years in sales and marketing at headquarters in Mountain View, and then in Los Angeles. I'm gonna call on Kenzy next because Kenzy and I actually met through Google, and then I'll circle around to the other panelists so they can introduce themselves as well.
Yeah, so I'm Kenzy. I'm born and raised in Raleigh, North Carolina. I went to school, undergrad at Hampton University, got my computer science degree, then went to Carnegie Mellon, got my master's in human-computer interaction. Along the way, interned with Angelin at Google, and also did a few stints at a few other tech companies like Adobe. And currently, I'm a senior product designer at Hulu, where I lead a lot of the design efforts for our web platform, and also all of our Discover.
Awesome. And I'll note that Kenzy admits that Hampton is not the real HU, but it's the best HU. Next, we got Darius Robinson.
Hey, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. My name is Darius Robinson. I'm born and raised here in Atlanta, Georgia. I attended Kennesaw State University. I have a master's degree in higher education from Georgia Southern University. How I got into tech, I actually landed a job at Amazon Web Services as a tech recruiter. So I recruit software development engineers for the EC2 core platform. So excited to be here.
Nice. Then we've also got Luther Martin.
Hey everyone, I'm Luther. I was born and raised there, or I don't know exactly where you guys, I guess people from all over, but I was born and raised in Jackson, Mississippi. Well, not exactly Jackson, but I pretty much lived in Jackson. All of my community, my church was there in Jackson. I went to college at Jackson State University, where I majored in computer engineering. From there, I moved to New York and started working with IBM. Since that time, I've moved to the West Coast to pursue some additional interests outside of IBM, but all still in tech and software engineering. Yeah.
Nice. Always good to see other people from Jackson in technology. Ashley, our founder, is also from Jackson, Mississippi, and she works at Amazon, in case people didn't know. And then we've got Miss Jessica Kennedy Vickers.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica, also born and raised in Mississippi in a small town called Woodville, Mississippi. Went to undergrad at Jackson State University. My undergrad degree was in computer engineering and have a master's in systems engineering from Old Dominion University. I've been all over, everywhere from the defense industry, working for the federal government, to Disney, to Universal, and now I'm the manager of digital delivery with Royal Caribbean here in Miami.
Wonderful. I have so many questions on that already. I think that shows that you can do a lot of different things with engineering. You said you're doing computer in undergrad, and then you're doing systems in graduate school. So there are a lot of different angles that you can take once you actually have a degree in CS. But first, I'm going to start by asking you all who or what influenced your career goals. And we can start with you, Jessica.
Okay, so my mom was a chemistry teacher. My dad was an accountant. So math and science was just like ingrained in us from like little kids. So I always knew that I loved math and science, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do. My older brother and sister were both majoring in computer science, and I knew I wanted to touch hardware a little more than they did. So that's really what prompted me. And then every role I've held since then has just been about working on something cool. So.
Nice. Luther?
Hey, there's been so many people. Of course, I can always say my parents, but I landed in tech kind of by accident. I had this mentor, her name was Sherry Beck-Lauren. I always wanted to be a lawyer, but I wanted to major in English or political science when I went to college, but she was like, you need to major in engineering because it's going to give you a lot more flexibility when you graduate. And I'm so thankful for that. So I think she's like the single most person that really like was the catalyst into engineering. But along the way, I mean, it's been friends from Jackson State, co-workers. It's just been so many people along the way. And I try to add more people as I'm going just to make sure I'm continually growing and getting new perspective.
Nice. Darius, how did you get your start, or what influenced you to go into tech?
Being that I'm a recruiter, I guess I take an opposite approach, as you kind of mentioned earlier. I guess what got me into tech was working at Amazon Web Services. Um, I didn't know much about tech before I came to the company, but now that I'm here, it's just really opened my eyes. And I actually studied for the AWS Solutions Architect Associate and received a certification. That's just how much I was passionate about, what I was doing. But that's pretty much it for now. Yep.
Okay, and is that a degree that you mentioned, the AWS Associate?
It's a Solutions Architect Associate. It's just a certification that anyone can, you can study for just to learn more about AWS products and services.
Okay, I think that's something that we should probably share with viewers at the end. So we'll get a couple of links as we're talking. We'll probably get some resources and ideas for resources and share it with everyone at the end of the conversation. Kenzy, what about you? What influenced you to actually get a career in technology?
Yeah, so definitely my dad. He's a computer scientist and he like codes all the time. So growing up, he would try to assign me codes, but it was him that got me interested in tech, but I found it very boring, the codes he would try to assign. So what I actually started to lean towards was like, this was back in the day, but like MySpace layouts and Tinder layouts and creating those. And so those had like while my dad was like the introduction, those had like a stronger influence on what I actually do now.
Nice. So I'm wondering how we get from interest to actually practicing a role. How did you find internships or jobs when you're in school? And maybe this is going to be different for you, Darius. How did you go from theory to actually practicing in the career of your choice?
Is this question for me?
We can start with Kenzy, but Darius, I'm sure yours is going to be a little bit different since you didn't major in CS, or CS is computer science for people who don't know.
Yeah, so I did not know when I went to Hampton, I didn't even know a career existed in product design. I just knew I liked like designing MySpace and Tinder layouts and stuff. So when I went to Hampton, I was a double major at first of computer science and broadcast journalism. And the only reason I was broadcast journalism major was because they had the Apple computers in that department and I was trying to use like Photoshop and all that stuff. And it wasn't until like getting internships and stuff like that that I started to realize like, wait a minute, there is a career in product design. And that's when I like kind of switched kind of my career trajectory and thus just went to grad school and studied that. But yeah, it was through those internships that I was like, wait a minute, this actually is like something I can make money off of.
How did you get internships?
Crazy. Through professors, like, and really just throwing spaghetti at the wall. I would say like the first internships I did were nothing that I was interested in. Like internships, like this is not that this won't be of someone else's interest, but it wasn't of my interest, but like robotics or like medical stuff. I was like, I'm not interested in this. But those helped me by having those experiences that kind of allowed me to have the portfolio and the resume to then like apply at Google and actually get that internship.
How old are you? And I'll circle around because I'm sure everyone has varied experiences here. But how old were you when you actually started getting into the workforce in that way?
Like product design?
Mm-hmm. Were you a freshman? Were you a sophomore?
No, it wasn't until I graduated from Hampton that I actually got into product design, because even at Google, both summers, I was more so like a web developer engineer, not necessarily product design. So it wasn't until I graduated, went to school for it.
Okay, so I'm hearing a lot of opportunity comes from a formal educational environment. And I think at some point we're going to circle back and talk about, if you're not necessarily a college student, if you're not a computer science major, what are some ways you can get into this industry? But Luther, what was your experience as someone who didn't go to grad school, but you went to undergrad for computer science? How did you get your foot in the door?
Sure. So as I said, I went to Jackson State. It's an HBCU, and I think HBCUs present unique opportunities for like diverse candidates going into tech. So what happened with us was we had various companies. In my case, it was the DoD, I think the Navy specifically, coming into our school looking for talent. So they coordinated with the dean, and the dean pretty much looked at the talent that they had, and I was one of the folks that was selected that year. So very from the onset, right after freshman year, I had internships lined up for the next 4 years. So freshman year, I did that internship. It was with the Navy in Dalvin, Virginia. Did some networking work. Turns out I didn't really like that side of it as much. So what that did was I already had a security clearance. I had some experience doing, development in industry. So that made my resume look pretty appealing for the next company. So from there, that launched me into getting other internships. So year after year, summer after summer, I went to various companies or universities to do research. But I think the next year I went with Boeing, which is really where I learned programming. It gave me a love for it there, seeing it, I don't know, just in practice, in use. And then from there, I wanted to do graduate school. So I started doing some more research focused work during the summer, the next 2 summers. So it's University of Michigan and then Berkeley. But then, I don't know, from there, I decided not to go to grad school. I was just completely burned out right after, and I was like, I'll get a job. And there were a couple of different opportunities. I knew I didn't want to do defense anymore. I wanted to go into like the private sector. And I had some connections into IBM. So yeah, I interviewed, and out of the offers, I think they had some of the most compelling work at the time. And that's what, got me from Mississippi to New York.
Nice. I think something you bring up that maybe Jessica can speak to as well is working in technology for companies that aren't necessarily techie. So the Department of Defense and Boeing, people might not associate them with Apples and IBMs and Hulu, but these are still companies that require technology. So Jessica, what was your experience as a computer science major, as a systems engineer major, working for someone like Royal Caribbean? How did that even come about?
In a weird way. So like Luther, I started interning early, like after my freshman year. And because I had this fear of like graduating and not having a job. So I was applying to everywhere. Any product I had in my dorm room, I was like, oh yeah, they probably need a computer engineer. Let me apply to a job with them. And so 2 of my internships in college were in the defense industry with Lockheed. One was with Hewlett Packard. And from there, like Luther, I had the security clearance. And so I was recruited by the Navy to come and basically test guns, warships, install software on Navy ships. So I did that for the government and ended up at Royal. Honestly, I went to the Grace Hopper conference of 2019, and I love cruises. My husband and I are always on a cruise ship. I stopped by the booth just to talk about my love of cruises and ended up walking away with a job. Like, I wish I could say it didn't happen like that, but it really was for me just talking about like, oh, I love your products. And it led to me being poached.
Awesome. If somebody from the BeamPath team could drop in the link to Grace Hopper to that conference, that would be helpful too. That's a conference that's focused on women who work in technology, for people who don't know. And
they currently have an application open for women of color in tech to attend for free. So
amazing. I attended that. It might have been 2019. I went there as well for free.
Oh, really?
Because of a scholarship. Yeah.
Darius,
Angela,
can we just put a plug on these conferences that are focused towards like whether women's or minorities? All of my internships after that first one came through the NSBE, as well as my first job at IBM. So these conferences, engineering conferences, I don't know if we'll circle back to it, but I definitely think we should highlight these conferences.
We will circle back. And Kenzy was a speaker at Afrotech. So yes, let us plug all these conferences. Darius, what are you seeing on people's resumes what are they doing prior to coming to Amazon that actually lets them become successful in the interview process?
Wow, great question. After being here for 2 years, what I've learned is to work at a company like Amazon or like a FANG company, and by FANG I mean Facebook, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, it's not really what's on your resume. It's more so, and this is in the job family that I recruit out of. So I recruit back-end software developers. But what I've learned is that the people who actually get the jobs are the ones who do the work. And when I talk about do the work, I mean people studying for their interview, practicing for the coding assessment, practicing for the behavioral interviews. At companies at this scale, it's really about the things you do to prepare to get the job, because they're not really looking at your resume. I mean, I review interview feedback every single day, and I can tell you, on average, I see a question about, hey, tell me about what you were doing at XYZ company. It's more about, tell me about a time you dealt with a difficult customer, or tell me how you would code this problem. And a lot of that can't be found on the resume. So I say that to say, I do think you need to have the right keywords on your resume so that your resume can be exposed. But it's more so about the work you do to prepare for the interviews. And, one piece of advice I'll give anyone who's really trying to work at one of these top tech companies is to take your time. Like, if you don't feel prepared to take that interview, don't take it, because you will ultimately fail. And if you say the wrong thing, you get negative feedback. It's in the system. Everybody can see it. And it could blackball you forever, or it could blackball you for 6 months or 2 years. So just really make sure you prepare, and never let a recruiter, try to force you into doing something if you don't feel that you're prepared to move forward.
Okay. I have a lot of questions here, and then we also have some questions from the audience. One is, you said that you do recruitment specifically for back-end engineers. Maybe all of you as people with engineering experience can say, what are the different types of engineering somebody could do at a FANG company and beyond? We can start with you, Darius, and then
Okay. I didn't know. And that's a good point, right? So, people say, well, hey, I'm a software engineer. Well, a software engineer can mean a lot of things. You could be a front-end engineer. You could be a back-end engineer. You could be a full stack engineer. You could be a data engineer. You could be a business intelligence engineer. You could be a systems engineer with a software engineer title. So, I think another thing to add is that when people say, the types of jobs they're looking for, they should be very specific about the type of role they want to be in. Because saying software engineer is a very generic statement. But if you can come in and say, hey, I'm a software engineer, I have a passion for back-end development, I love working in Java, C++, and distributed systems, I could say, oh, wow, that's perfect. Versus you coming to me and say, hey, I want to be a software engineer at Amazon. That can mean a lot of different things.
So Jessica, what type of engineering do you do?
So actually, in my role now, I've stepped away from hardcore engineering, and I'm more of a project manager. So you come to my team when you have a cool idea that you want to put on one of our ships, and my team is helping to develop a plan to get you there. So yeah, really project managers wrapped up in a digital delivery title.
Okay. And Luther, what about you? What type of engineer are you?
Yeah, I'm more at the OS level now. But as Darius is saying, it's a whole stack and so many different areas you can focus. Oh, I'm sorry, the operating system.
Okay.
So if you have a Mac, the operating system is usually what you're engaging with. You're opening applications that run on top of our operating system. The operating system is responsible for allowing the arbitrating who uses the hardware. I'm trying to make this make sense. Which applications are actually in the hardware that's arbitrated by the operating system. But as I was saying, as Darius said, there's a whole stack. I think Kenzy hinted at doing web development, which is super high up in the stack. Whereas what we call low level is like firmware engineering, people who are responsible for running software that initializes the hardware in these systems. And then there's like the kernel, which is like the operating system level, which is where I am now. So yeah, I mean, it's just so many different areas.
Okay. I'm kind of wrapping my head around it. There is a stack and people fall in different places on the stack. Okay, Kenzy, where are you in the engineering stack?
Well, I can give like the equivalent of the design stack
Okay.
when I'm not there. So design, like a few years ago, it used to be kind of separated by like user interface and UX designers. So people who would be super specialized on just the visual aspects would be kind of like the UI designers or user interface designers. And then people who are focused on the interactions and the navigation would be user experience designers. But I think the industry has kind of moved towards, at least for design, expecting more designers to be full stack equivalent of like knowing how to design in terms of having the visual style or the visual language, but also knowing how to do the UX and like make the system and things like that. So I'm kind of more of a full stack designer. So looking at the overall, like how do users go from place to place on a website or an app? And that's also across like different devices. So for Hulu, that's web, both iOS and Android and living room devices like George, Roku, tvOS, all those things.
Okay, so moving back to Darius, if I'm coming to you about an interview, I need to know what type of engineering I'm actually looking at or what type of design I'm actually looking at before I even look at the job board, right?
Right. You know, it's that too. I think another piece of it is that a lot of times people don't know exactly what they want to do, right? They say, I want to get into tech, or I want to be a software engineer, or I want to be a back-end engineer, but they really don't know what it means. And, one thing I've learned, in recruiting in tech and more specifically Black talent is that a lot of Black talent doesn't really like to code. Like they're really more interested in the design, in the product, in the people engagement. A lot of people don't know that being a software engineer really means sitting in front of the computer all day and coding. And from what I'm starting to learn, a lot of us prefer to be out and about and talking to people and like having more technical conversations versus just being behind the computer and seeing what happens. So I think we have to, if you're interested in moving into tech, just doing that additional research so that you can make sure that's what you actually want to do. So you're spending the time correctly.
Okay, that's a very good point. Someone also mentioned that they want more insight on the behavioral interview. So there's the code component, which you said people just need to study for. But what can someone do to have a better behavioral interview?
Wow. I mean, you hit the nail on the head, especially at a company like Amazon. Behavioral interviews are very important. Um, my advice is to you really have to think about problems that you have solved. And you really have to think about how you took ownership of solving that problem. You have to think about, adding data points to solidify why you made a decision. I was actually just speaking with a candidate this morning, and he was speaking in what we consider in general about something that he worked on. He was talking about he was working on it. He built an app, and he was talking about how him and his friend felt that they would use Java versus C++ because it was a little easier to code. Well, when I was speaking with him, I said, hey, like, I understand that, but you want to do more research to justify how you feel. Companies don't hire you to make decisions based on how you feel. You want to be able to say, hey, based on my research, I found that Java is a better fit for this platform because X, Y, and Z. Or I prefer Python because the product will work better because of X, Y, and Z. And then you can make a decision. So I think that's the first step. The second step is getting on like websites. There's like prompt.com, there's interview.io, and practicing. like, having that one-on-one conversation and making sure you're saying the right things, because what you think is a good idea, like, might not fan well when it's one thing to have it written on paper, it's another to articulate it. So just, going from that standpoint.
What were those two resources you mentioned? Pramp.io?
Pramp.com, that's PRAMP.com. That's for more tech style interviews. And there's also interview.io. I guess one other thing I'll add is just that I strongly encourage candidates to try to work with someone that is on the team or within the department. Recruiters are gatekeepers, and they're going to give you might look up and get a great recruiter, but on average, you might not have the best recruiter. So the more advice you can get from someone who's actually in the company, who has experience what it's like to be in that role, who has interviewed, they can get you more insight so that you can make sure you're preparing in the right format.
Also very helpful. Something you mentioned that stood out to me is that Black people, from your experience, don't often enjoy the day-to-day of coding. I'm curious what the people on this call's experience has been in their day-to-day work. So we can start with Luther, since you actually are a software engineer. How's your day-to-day experience on the job?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked this question, because when Darius said it, it kind of made me poke my head up a little bit, because there is like this idea that software developers are only sitting in front of a computer and coding and kind of isolated from people. And I'll say a good portion of your job is spent in front of a computer when you're alone and you're like heads down debugging, looking through data, trying to figure out what the world is going on with your application or whatever it is that you're working on. But another portion is collaboration. Like, none of the problems that I've solved, especially the hard ones, I solve alone. So that requires a lot of talking with my teammates. We're in conference rooms on whiteboards trying to write out a flow. We're designing. There's a bit of even like creativity that's involved. So I'm the type of person, I enjoy social interaction, or I enjoy just collaborating and peer programming. Maybe not as much peer programming, but definitely collaborating. And you do get a good amount of that as a software developer. So it varies. It depends on where you are in the life cycle of your product or whatever it is that you're working on. There are points where you're spending a lot of time engaging your teammates and trying to come up with a design. And there's points where you're implementing, you're coding. And then there's another point where you're debugging, where I think it's kind of split, because there may be expertise for other people on the team that you need to bring in to try to understand these problems, as well as you're also just heads down trying to understand where something may have went wrong in your own code. So
okay, so it can be interactive. It can be as interactive or as individualistic as the job requires it to be.
Certainly, I would say it's just very difficult to get by and not collaborate with people. Yeah.
That makes sense. What about you, Jessica? What's been your experience?
So one reason why I ventured away from coding, anyone that knows me knows that I'm a people person. And usually early in my career, I realized that people came to me like for organization things. Like whenever there was chaos, they were coming to me, and I never understood it. I was like, why do they come to me when things are a mess? And it's because like I have a natural gift of like finding organization in chaotic situations. And so I just really embraced that. It's how I started getting into the project management and delivery side of things, because I'm a natural people person. And then I really like to like clear the clutter. So I think it's just about figuring out what you naturally do well and where you could fit in the tech life cycle, because there's a place for all personalities, all skill sets. It's just about what matches with what you just naturally do well.
Yeah. So if I'm a people person, but I still want to be in tech, are there some hard skills or some softwares I need to know in order to better position myself? Do I need to know Asana? Do I need to be Six Sigma certified?
Honestly, it just depends on the company and the role. So in my role, Asana, Monday.com, Jira, Smart Sheets, like that's what I'm using a lot in my current role. But it really just depends on the company, because I've been with companies that they don't use any of those. They're focusing on Microsoft Project and that suite. It honestly will change depending on the company.
I think you
Okay.
make sorry, just to interject very quickly, but this gets to my last point. If you're working at company X and you want to go to company Y, you're using Monday.com. They're looking for someone who has a lot of experience using Microsoft Office products. So you come with these 5 years of experience in product or program management, thinking that all of your experience on Monday.com is going to get you the job. Little do you know, by making that one statement, you talked yourself out of the job because you're not a fit. So by having conversations with people like Jessica, you know, like, hey, this is exactly what they're looking for. These are things you want to make sure that you cover during the interview. If you don't cover those things, you cross yourself right out of the interview.
Mhm.
When you have this level of intel around what the customer or the company is looking for, the chances of you acing that interview drastically increases. I speak with a lot of people. People message me all the time saying, "Hey Darius, I just received a certification," or "I just graduated with, this degree," and that's great. Companies don't hire you based off of your certifications or your education. They hire you based off of your experience. And the more experience you get using a particular product or service or technology will increase the chances of you ultimately getting that job. And so when you think about, landing a job in tech, really understand what it means to take on that role and understand what companies use that service so that as you grow your experience, you can land that job down the line.
Okay. Okay. And Kenzie, this sounds like something you could also speak to if we're talking about how a lot of talent seems to enjoy the creative side, the artsy side, the design side. What are some of the things that you're using in your day to day?
Yeah, so it's interesting that Luther and Jessica, y'all talked about like enjoying like, collaboration and talking to people. I'm the opposite. I'm like, I'd rather not. I'd rather just like be in a corner and design. I agree completely with Jessica, what you had mentioned, that like tech has those kind of it's like tracks where you can kind of go on. So on the design side, there's like individual contributor, where if you want to just be more isolated, quote unquote, it's still collaboration, but you can do that versus like becoming a manager does require a bit more people skills and stuff. But both tracks lead towards similar, like you can both be promoted and be at the same level at both of those tracks. On the day-to-day, I use Figma. Used to use Sketch, but now I'm using Figma. On the design side, like the software changes pretty constantly. Like when I first started, it was Photoshop, then it went to Adobe, something like the Adobe, I forgot what it's called, like Adobe XR, I believe, and then started doing Sketch and InDesign, or not InDesign, but InVision, and now it's Figma. So design side is like a constant learning of new tools. That's just making the whole process a bit better.
If I can just interject here, because I'm hearing a lot about just different tools, and I hear very specific names. And as Kenzy just pointed out, we're in an industry where things are going to be rapidly changing, but there are going to always be new tools. I don't really think it's that important to mirror yourself to a particular tool. And it's the same word for programmers. Like there's so many languages out there. There are new languages that are coming. I don't know, languages that are being phased out. I think what's important is that you have a great understanding of your fundamentals for whatever area that you're trying to go to. You have a good understanding of concepts. And when it comes to the tooling, that you cast yourself as a person that's willing to learn, that has a track record of stepping into something new and picking it up and rolling with it. But yeah, don't too much tie yourself to a particular tool to say because you don't know this tool, this language, that I'm unqualified for this role. If you got the concepts down, a lot of these things translate to the various tools and languages. Sell yourself as a person who solves problems, who's willing to learn new things.
I like that.
Come to Amazon. We can use you.
Darius is pitching.
I'll keep
Someone
that
else has, maybe this is relevant, but we have a question from a viewer who's asking, do you have advice for someone who only has small business or self-employment on their resume? and they're trying to pivot out to a larger company, maybe something that you all just talked about could apply to them as well?
Yeah, I would say transferable skills, like figure out exactly what the skills are. Like if you have an idea of the company you want to get to, figure out what skills translate from your current role to that company. Honestly, people don't always necessarily care where you've been. It's like, can you sell yourself to make yourself relevant to that next role? And that's how I've been able to move around. I'm like, look, I can do this. Like I can also do it for your company. So it's knowing how to sell yourself. So just be able to map it over to that new role or industry.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Darius, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Luther. I'll go after you. You're fine.
Okay. I just wanted to give a quick story. The engineer that's next to me at my company, he's a senior engineer. He doesn't have a college degree. And there are people that we've hired since him who do really well. What I think that was key is that he wrote his resume in such a way, or whatever it is that whatever his touch point, I think some people came with their resume, some people actually had like a contact, and that's what got them into the interview process. You don't have to have a degree, but you just need to know how to do the work. So whether you get that through YouTube, you can just go build projects on your own and list those on your resume. That's especially what I did as I was starting out, because I didn't have a lot of experience. I did side projects. I went on YouTube. I watched videos. I mean, college degrees in tech, they don't really mean anything. You can have a 4.0 GPA and we won't hire you on the spot. We want to see you demonstrate what you know. So as long as you can demonstrate it, demonstrate it. Got a little feedback going there. As long as you can demonstrate what you know. I think that's my cue to stop talking. I think that's the key.
We can hear you. I can hear you fine.
Okay, cool. I think I made my point though. Just on your resume, do side projects. Say that you went through this online course in this new area, just so it stick out to the person that's reviewing your resume. But once you're in the door, it's all about what you can demonstrate to them. It's not about what's on paper at that point.
And, just to come in from a recruiting perspective, LinkedIn is king. Like if I couldn't give anybody any better advice, is LinkedIn. Every single job that I have received has been through LinkedIn. I've been at Amazon for 2 years, and the amount of people who are constantly reaching out to me today about opportunities is mind blowing. You know why? It's not because I have, Amazon as my job title. It's because I'm very public about the things that I'm doing. So you could literally go on LinkedIn right now. You can search my hashtag #DayOneDarius, and you can see the types of problems that I'm solving, the things that I'm doing. And so by having this type of a platform, people always know. So if you're someone with a small business or you're trying to make a career change, you use a platform like LinkedIn or GitHub or Reddit, and you become that person. You become that subject matter expert in that space, and you start to post about it. And as you continue to post about it, people will start to see. And one day, while you're not actually looking, somebody's going to say, Hey, John, I've been following you for a while. We're hiring over at Google. We would like to learn more about you. But what I see a lot of people do is the opposite. They say, hey, I want to get into tech, and they say, I've been applying to jobs for 3 months and nobody's responding to me. I say, did you read the requirements for the job? Yeah, I read them. So the job requirements say you need 3 years of industry experience in software engineering. You just graduated last semester. Where did you get your 3 years of experience? Oh, I've been coding since high school. Well, see, that's why your resume is being rejected, because you're not reading the job description. What's a better approach? Why not get on LinkedIn or get in your Facebook group or alumni group and say, hey, my name is Darius Robinson. I just graduated with a degree in computer science. Can anyone connect me with recruiters from X, Y, and Z company? Or can anyone connect me with a hiring manager or someone who works at Google or Microsoft or Facebook? I would love to get in front of them and tell them a little more about myself. What you'll learn is you're more likely to land a job interview by being referred than you are by applying for the job. I can tell you now, I look at applications every day, and 90% of the applications I look at are not even a fit for the job. The people who actually come in most cases, are the ones who are being referred because their friend is in the company. They know the interview process. They know what they're looking for. They send a resume to the recruiter, or they work backwards. You know, I've landed jobs by seeing a position open on LinkedIn, literally found a hiring manager and said, hey, I'm Darius. I see that you guys are hiring. I would love to talk to you more about this position. Bypassed the recruiter, went right to the leader. I got the job. That's how I got the job at Amazon. I was referred by one of my old coworkers into the company.
Do you want to like also talk about that with like that internal and external referral system? Because it's similar at Hulu and at a lot of companies I've worked for where internal and external referrals end up getting the job. And while that can be really great if it's in your favor, I would say as a Black person, it's usually not in my favor because usually like the people who are at the company, since it's mostly white or non-Black people, when they're referring their friends are usually not Black people either. And so it's like, it also makes it pretty challenging for a minority to try to get into a company as an external or internal referral if you don't have that connection.
And I'll honestly say, even if you don't think you have a connection, you may. So when I worked at NBC Universal, so I didn't discuss it, but I built a ride for Universal Studios. I was part of the team that opened up the Fast and Furious attraction in Orlando. And I got that job from reaching out to the lady who then became my manager on LinkedIn. I saw that she also used to work for the Department of Defense. I reached out to her and I was like, hey, you have some of the same DoD certifications I have. You work for Universal. I'd like to work for you. So be like fearless. Reach out to people because you never know, what connection you may have with them. She also ended up being from the South. She was from Georgia. I was from Mississippi. I made that connection work and I got a job. So find a way to connect with people, even if you think, oh, it doesn't really look like we have something in common. No, find anything to connect with them, whether that's through, alumni association, whether that's if you're Greek, whether that's through that organization, find a way. Like I will look up every Greek organization and cross-reference it with a company I want to work for. And I'm like, oh, you're a Delta? I'm an AKA. My sister's a Delta. My mom is a Zeta. Use your connections.
Yeah. And I think the point too that you're making is that a connection might not be somebody that you're connected with right now, but just do some cold outreach if that's what's required, because Kenzy's point is really, I think it's valid. And I've seen the same thing at some of these companies, but if you extend your view of who is a connection, you can just feel comfortable emailing people.
I think the other part too is that you don't necessarily have to be connected to that person. You might know somebody that knows that person. There have been several times where I've been on LinkedIn and I said, hey, I don't know Ivan, but I see he's mutually connected to Nashley. I know Nashley. Let me call Nashley. Hey, Nashley, I see Ivan is recruiting for this job. Can you connect me with him? Now I have his phone number. Now I'm on the phone with him. So connections can also be like what we consider in LinkedIn world, like second and third degree.
But you do have to be scrappy, folks. And another thing that makes people incentivized to refer you, even if they don't know you that well, is employees get bonuses too. So if you refer somebody who actually does get hired to the company, they're actually incentivized to help you have a successful process because they get money from it. One other question that I want to ask before we open up the floor to the audience, Kenzy brings up the point about diversity in technology. And I was wondering if you all had any thoughts on the conversation that there's not a great pipeline of Black talent in technology. If you think that's true or false. If it is false, why is the narrative so pervasive? If it is true, what can we do to fix it? And we can start with Luther.
Awesome question. So I've had this conversation with some of my leadership team here at the company. And I personally believe that we do have a shortage of talent, especially for people who want to program. As Darius kind of got at earlier, most Black people don't want to program. They want to do something else, other areas. So from a programming standpoint, it's very difficult in relation to like somebody that's in the majority, like a white candidate. It's very difficult to find Black talent that's a talented programmer. I think a lot of that is because of a lot of these I should say, I guess, white folks. They may have exposure to technology beforehand. Before college, they may have parents or cousins or uncles who are engineers. Whereas I didn't grow up with that kind of exposure. I thought it was super cool that Kenzy knew somebody, his dad, that was a computer scientist. When you don't have people that look like you in these areas, often you don't even think it's possible, or you don't even consider that route. So what I've been telling our leadership team is, we got to get in. We can't go once they're graduating from college. We need to get in way early in terms of making investments. So that's at the high school level. We need you on the campus helping teaching some of these courses. It's particularly at HBCUs. That's where I went to school. And I think that's going to prepare the pipeline. So when they do get up or start applying for these jobs, they can compete at a very high level. There's this terrible stigma that I feel like diversity means that you're lowering the bar. And I don't agree with that at all. And at some companies it's really bad. And you may even see it. People may kind of disrespect you. I haven't ran into it directly at the company I am, but I've heard conversations. I talk with other people that, oh, that's a diversity hire. And that kind of implies, oh, they got in because of what they look like versus what they know. And I'm all about changing that. And the way we change that is that we have really talented engineering people who are willing to get into the rigorous parts of engineering, do the hardcore work, and do well at it. And to do that, I think we got to make investments well beyond just once they graduate out of college. We got to get started high school and invest into that curriculum, into those communities, and as well as have a presence throughout the campus experience, the college experience.
Okay.
It
looks like you had something to say.
Yeah, I kind of see the pipeline, like when people say that there's a pipeline problem, I see it as like a bit problematic because it's pointing the blame kind of back on minority groups to like be or do something differently, when in actuality it's like maybe the recruiting should be a bit more efficient, or maybe like how we look at talent should be a little bit differently. Because if, for example, the director of my department has like a music background, and if they could find a way to be like, okay, he has a music background, but he fits as a director of product design at Hulu, then we can do the same thing for what Black people are doing, and like whatever career it is. Like we can figure out like, okay, like maybe they're doing, I don't know, something different. Maybe they're doing Instagram, but like we can find a way to figure out how those skills correlate to this job that we're looking at. And there's so many biases that when we come into the door of like having to be 5-10 times better than what our white equivalent is, when in actuality it's like we shouldn't even have to be trying to do that, because like they're getting in just by being mediocre. Like, so like we shouldn't have to keep going, like doing this narrative of trying to be better and better, because it's like that bias is still going to be there, like no matter what. So
Get it. +1. Jessica, Darius, anything to add?
I guess I come from a recruiting perspective. For me, I think from my notes here, I think there are about 5 different problems when you think about the pipeline. I think the first problem is the curriculum and access to information. And Luther already kind of mentioned it, that a lot of diversity talent are not exposed to the information they need to be successful at the job and even in the interview. I think, outside of that is self-confidence. I mean, I'll be very transparent with you. Like, coming from the company that I was with, I never thought I had a chance at working at my company. Like, I didn't think I was capable, but someone said, hey, like, you want to come and work here? And the reason they asked me is because they knew my skill. They knew that I was very good at what I was doing, and they, ultimately got that chance. I think the third is career trajectory. What I notice a lot of times with diversity talent, especially for software engineers, is that their career like goes in different paths. So they might start off in software engineering, they might move into product development, they might jump into program development, they might go back into software engineering. And so a lot of times when that resume is being reviewed, it's hard for that hiring manager to make that decision because they're saying, hey, I'm not sure this person is a good fit because they haven't been doing software engineering for 5 years, or they've done this or they've done that. I think this is where it really gets very murky. There are so many companies who are super invested in hiring diversity talent. The problem is they're so focused on recruiting that they're not spending the time preparing. And I see this all the time in the system. Candidates are being reached out to, and this is outside of diversity. This is just in general. When you work at large tech companies, recruiters are moving very fast to try to get the position filled, and candidates are falling victim to that. They're sending them assessments. They're just pushing, and candidates aren't given the amount of time they need to prepare, ultimately failing the assessment or failing the phone interview because you reached out to me today and then you telling me that my interview is Friday. You can't interview at companies like this in less than 2 weeks to a month. And if you go and talk to a lot of people who work at top tech companies, they will tell you, hey, I took 2 months to prepare for my interview at the FANG companies. I interviewed with all of them. That's the type of prep that is required to come and work at a company like this. I think, the last part is self-identification. So many people work at top tech companies, and on LinkedIn, you might assume that they're a diverse candidate, right? But people are not completing that part of the application. So what does that say to the data? If you come into the company and you don't identify as a male or female or African American or Caucasian or whatever the case may be, it doesn't count. So if you're hired and you don't identify, the company can't say that they have the market. And so I think a lot of times a lot of these companies, I would say on average, probably have 20 to 40% more diversity talent than they can show because they didn't decide to identify. So one thing I will say to everyone on this call is that if you're applying to a job at a company, identify yourself, because ultimately this type of information is used to make sure that companies are doing the work for the talent that's coming into the company. So.
And this is always a touchy subject for me, just because when I hear about the pipeline problem, I always ask, are you going where they are? So if you say you can't find candidates, but I've never seen you at Jackson State, my friends at Alcorn, Tougaloo, Hampton, Howard, they've never seen you on their campuses. You're not at NSBE, you're not at Grace Hopper, you're not at, the Black Engineer of the Year Awards. Where are you looking for these candidates? Are you expecting them to come to you? Well, when they're on your website, they don't see employees that look like them. So why would they seek you out? You need to be going where they are. And so that's always a problem for me because, I think it was Kenzy that said, you're putting it on the candidates or the employees when you should be reaching out to them and making yourself known as wanting them. Because just like you want to be known, wanted as a big company, they want to be wanted as a possible candidate for you. So it's a two-way street for me. Go where they are.
And to add another point to that too, something that you mentioned, Jessica, that makes me think about this is that with the pipeline, it makes me kind of, when companies say it's a pipeline issue, it makes me question of seeing that data and those numbers, like seeing the data and numbers of what the company currently has in terms of their demographics and diversity is one thing, but seeing, okay, how many people out of all the people who you are sourcing and interviewing, how many of those are Black? And then from that interview process, how many of those Black people are actually getting job offers? Because maybe it's not the pipeline, maybe it's a leaky pipeline. Maybe the people who are part of the process of interviewing may be like discriminatory or something. So like actually looking at that data would be able to, like, I think better pinpoint where in the process Black candidates are dropping off.
And I'm sure Darius is going to listen to all of that feedback and share it with management. But we are coming to the end of the presentation. This was so great. And I know there are a lot of other questions here that we'll probably have to address on social. But just so you all know what came in, people are asking about if they're in a career outside of tech, how can they get some part-time experience or some side gig experience or some work from home experience to actually bone up their resume? Or if they're talking about a non-tech role, is it limited to just being a product manager or a project manager? So these are things I want the audience to know that we heard you and we saw you, and we'll take these questions offline and address them either via email or on social media, so look out for that. We also have a number of resources coming in that people are sharing that we're also going to send via email as well to all the attendees. But as far as the Beam Path is concerned, we do this every second Saturday. If you'd like to sign up for our next tech office hours next month, it's going to be on how to start creating multiple streams of revenue. I'll post that link right there. If you're watching this now, you'll get 15% off any purchase you make in the Beam Path store with the code MAYBEAMS. So that's also in the chat. And if you'd like to see more content or we aren't doing the programming that you'd like, you want to see more of something, less of something, if you could take that survey that I just posted, we would also really appreciate your feedback. So thank you to everyone who participated. All of you are incredible speakers with incredible insights. We'll probably have to do a part 2 at some point.
For sure.
Just let us know.
Let me know.
We got you. Kenzy, Luther,
Ready.
great having you all.
It's been awesome.
All right. We'll see you next time, y'all. June 12th.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye.